Biology Rose, and today we're going to be talking about section 4.2c of the problem of scale. That's going to be like book 2 or section 2 of belonging again to the address. And here we're talking about Milton, John Milton, on free exchange, and Samuel Loncar's work on Kuhn, which I think we can take alongside Alex Ebert's saturation, which is from his freak theory. And we've been talking so far on Jonathan Rauch, his extraordinary text, Kindly Inquisitors, and how we need to think about free speech as being a matter of gaining knowledge and experimentation and exploring ideas. Very often we associate free speech with kind of individual expression, but what Jonathan Rauch in his book wants to really emphasize is how free speech is a kind of free exchange by which knowledge acquisition is possible. And if we're not allowed to experiment, if we're not allowed to kind of talk about certain things, then we're probably going to really lose knowledge. We're probably going to be a stupider people. We're going to be more ignorant. And so what Rauch really wants to emphasize is thinking about free speech as a process of experimentation so that knowledge acquisition might be possible. And I think it's very interesting, John Milton had this fantastic defense of free speech in his day, and he talks about things like, for example, as a Christian, if God gave us free will so that we could make choices for ourselves, who do we think we are to censor and remove the ability of people to decide what they're going to talk about and what they're going to think about? And, there's also this kind of tradition that evil, Satan, falls for good reason. Like if you look at the Quran, there's this idea that Iblis doesn't worship Adam or serve Adam because the angels are made of fire and man is made of clay. And there's kind of this idea for some Sufis that Iblis is the highest monotheist because he will not serve man, only God. And there's also this kind of idea in some Christian thinking that, Lucifer falls because he's serving his idea of what's good for God or interprets humanity as not worthy of God. So it's an idea of the good coming in conflict with the good. And Milton kind of suggests that is what can often occur when we limit freedom. Our ideas of what's good for people comes in conflict with the actual good. And there's also this concept that if we're not allowed to freely explore our ideas, then when our idea of the good comes in conflict with the good, we won't even be able to tell. We won't have a way to test ourselves to figure that out, and so one will be lost and not even have the ability to know that they're lost. There's this idea in Calvin of total depravity being the inability to tell that you're totally depraved. And Kierkegaard talks about the man in despair as being the one who doesn't even know they're in despair. Knowing you're in despair is kind of the beginning of the way out. Well, none of that is possible without free speech, without the free exchange of ideas. And the reason why that's so important is because, if we end up in error, we also lose the capacity to tell that we're in error. And anyone who would tell us we're in error, we're likely going to not like. We're likely going to, you almost by definition must think that they're wrong. If somebody tells you, hey, you're in error and you've lost the capacity to know you're in error, well, we're necessarily going to think they're wrong because we've lost the capacity to tell that we are in error. So we are likely to think it would be a good idea to shut them down, to not let them speak. But you see, right here, we can start to approach kind of the problem of novelty in science and knowledge in general, with Samuel Loncar does such extraordinary work on Thomas Kuhn. I've been really enjoying his series over on the Becoming Human project, and he was on Theory Underground as well, and just a very impressive individual. And there's this problem where, in science, how do you have paradigms change, as Kuhn kind of talks about? Because if you as a scientist necessarily are trying to be novel, then that almost guarantees you won't be. And also if you are novel, it's going to be less likely that it's reliable, that we can believe in it, because, your goal was to create to be novel, as opposed to just doing the work, doing the science, doing the experimentation, and kind of happing upon the novel without realizing it. Well, likewise, if all of us defend our truth, we must necessarily defend what we believe is true. But then, if we're wrong, how can we possibly know we're wrong? You see how there are all these kind of paradoxes in knowledge acquisition. If we're in error, we can't know we're in error. Likewise, in science, if you try to be novel, then you probably won't be novel. And likewise, there's this kind of idea as well that if you're trying to be novel, aren't you kind of undermining scientific integrity? Well, here's another way to put it. If science comes upon a paradigm shift, And it can turn out that Newton was incomplete after Einstein, or, there's a lot of talk about string theory today being problematic, but then there's the extraordinary Witten, who's such a genius that Loncar was talking about. If science can ultimately be shown to be lacking by a future paradigm, why should we believe in science? It's constantly overturned, or old paradigms are shown to be incorrect. So why should we even think to believe it? Likewise, if we know that people can genuinely believe things and then it turns out that they are wrong, then why believe in any truth? Why think anything is possible? And you see, this is where the process as a whole of science is really important. And what Samuel was emphasizing, Mr. Loncar, is that there's the communal concept of science, which is the exchange of information that explores all possible angles until a paradigm is saturated. And once it's saturated, what you kind of have there is a kind of threshold change. And that's getting into Ebert's thinking. So let's take, for example, string theory. You have Mr. Witten that comes up with his mathematics, and there's a lot more people than Mr. Witten on string theory, but you come up with this. It's almost like when you come up with a theory, you come upon this kind of landscape. It's like you invent an entire landscape that can be explored. And you see, you need people to then go out and explore every angle of the territory, and we can't possibly expect the original thinker to think up every possible counter, every possible direction to look at, to fully explore the territory. But you see, and to really explore the territory, though, you also have to have some people that are trying to disprove the theory, because they're going to look at the theory in unique ways. But here's the key. The only reason they even have something to try to disprove is because Witten came up with string theory, or he came up with some of the fundamental concepts of it. So the only way and the very act then of trying to disprove a theory then probably results in people coming upon new ideas that they never before had, and then people try to disprove those new ideas, and on and on and on and on. And what you see is, it's almost like imagine you have this territory covered by fog, and everyone's work gradually removes more and more of the fog. And maybe eventually you see that string theory isn't true, but it's something else, some other kind of scientific principle, maybe a version of time-space where time is more fundamental and not just relative to space. But you see, the only reason you end up seeing this new theory, or the only reason that there's territory for fog to clear aside and help us see relative to, is because someone put forth a theory that could then be falsified. So what Loncar wants to really emphasize is this entire communal effort. And then the reliability of science is precisely not so much on the individual scientists, but the communal effort of science. This entire scene, if you will, to use language from Theory Underground, that everyone is enacting, and only able to enact because some people are putting forth theories that other people try to disprove. And the reliability of science is found in this total effort, not a given individual who comes up with an idea or not. Likewise, the development of knowledge is in the entire effort of free speech, not just an individual's free speech, to kind of emphasize Jonathan Rauch's work or Milton's. Like, the glory of, you could say, free speech is not found, say, in an individual's free expression, even though there can be great value to that. It's in the sum of all of the interactions and efforts to disprove and to speak against or to speak for that constitutes free speech, that makes free speech and free expression a force of knowledge acquisition in the world. Reliable knowledge acquisition, mind you. Well, so it goes with science. Now, that isn't to say you don't need the individual, the scientific genius, or someone that has kind of these new insights, to have a really important role in the community. So we're not saying the community is more important than the individual. In fact, you need this individual to kind of break up the status quo. One thinks about Against Method by Paul Feyerabend, that extraordinary text. We're glad, the point that Paul Feyerabend emphasizes is that when Galileo is coming up with his ideas, nobody believes him. Not just the church, the scientific community doesn't believe in him. And also Galileo is kind of, I don't want to say crazy, but the way that Feyerabend discusses him is like Galileo is kind of this radical, this kind of creative genius who uses science, yes, but also he's defending theories of his before he has the scientific evidence to back it up. And what's just very interesting is that what Against Method points out is that we can't say that science necessarily advances because of some kind of scientific consensus. Well, doesn't that kind of speak against this idea of science as community? No, because what Against Method points out is you need that individual who functions as neurodivergent, to reference the work that we talked about with Lorenzo, which is you have this one idea who's able to think non-rationally or creatively and introduce new ideas to the community that helps the community escape a Nash equilibria. They're able to then think new thoughts and escape suboptimal results they otherwise could have never escaped. But the only reason the individual, like a Galileo, is able to avoid a Nash equilibria or help a scientific community achieve new ideas that it otherwise wouldn't have ever thought is because there is a scientific community. Likewise, you need that I think about Mr. Ebert talking about the permissionaries, that one Sasquatch dancing guy who then everyone feels permitted to dance. You need that one individual to keep the community from falling into stagnancy or boredom, or just kind of repeating what everyone else has said. You need that one permissionary. You need that one kind of radical Galileo, that creative genius of an Einstein who's able to just have visions of people falling in, elevators made of glass. But you then need the community that can then question and try to deconstruct and disprove that one individual, who then the very fact that that individual's ideas stand creates all the more reason to believe in them, and then that creates new thoughts for the community to think, and they're able to think things that Einstein couldn't have thought, but they're only able to think them because of Einstein, so on and so on and so on. So what you have, you could say, is in the scientific community, following like Kuhn, is this idea that you have this one individual who's able to kind of function neurodiversely or kind of mentidivergently, that is able to introduce thinking to the community that helps it avoid Nash equilibria. That without that individual, the community would fall into Nash equilibria. But then if that individual didn't have a community, their ideas couldn't be tested or carried to new points of thinking that the original individual could have never taken it toward. And then the entire sum of all that interaction and interrelation eventually leads to a point where the paradigm, the theories of the day are explored in all possible directions. And if there is a point in that theory that's incomplete, or there's a little sort of thread that can be pulled on because it's weak or there's still a hanging question, well, now it can be located where that weak thread is or that opening is in the paradigm, and suddenly now you have a paradigm shift. It's like you've discovered a stairway, like I was talking with Peter about. Like you found a stairway, and now you can have a paradigm shift. But the only reason you were able to locate that stairway, that opening in the paradigm, was because there was a community of people who explored the theory throughout. And that would be where it's like the total saturation point that Mr. Ebert talks about with freak theory. And he'll talk about if you had like a windshield with a mosquito and you get, the windshield of the car is hit by a mosquito, you see the splat of the mosquito. But now imagine the entire windshield covered in mosquitoes, and now you wouldn't see anything. It would almost be as if there was no mosquito splat, because it is all you can see. So at this point of total saturation, there's a transformation that occurs. And it's as if the mosquito splat becomes something else. There's a kind of threshold and equilibrium that's crossed. Well, likewise, once someone introduces a theory, like a general relativity from Einstein, it's a splat on the windshield. Then you have other people exploring the splat or spreading it around on the windshield. And eventually, once the entire windshield is covered, now you've reached an entirely new thing. Now you can't even recognize it as a mosquito splat. And so there's a way in which general relativity has been expanded and because it's been explored in different ways to the point where it becomes an entirely new paradigm. It becomes an entirely new thing, ergo total saturation. And so the paradigm shift is a total saturation that is possible because of the creative individual existing with the community, thus no Nash equilibrium. And to overcome a Nash equilibrium, a suboptimal result, which is a result of everyone being rational. So you need that non-rationality, that bit of chaos, that bit of newness, creativity, craziness, even following a pole, a firebund, that then allows the process to get moving, where the mosquito is spread out per se, and the windshield is entirely covered and it becomes something else. Ergo, to get the process going, where the consensus is broken up with the scientific community, new ideas get moving, and then eventually there's a total saturation. A stairway is located that could only be located because of that total saturation, to then go to the next level, to go to a new possibility, ergo paradigm shift. And please note, if you don't explore the entire territory of a theory, if you don't explore it from every possible angle, even if you find a staircase, you can still deny taking the staircase, because you can say, well, we haven't explored over here yet, there's some other ideas we haven't explored. You have to go through this process of removing all plausible deniability that there is anywhere else you can go but up that staircase, or to the point of the paradigm shift, or to the point of total saturation. So in this way, the errors, the things that turn out to be mistakes, are actually necessary for the process of discovery, because they help you reach the point of total saturation. They help you reach the paradigm shift, which you could not reach until all possible means of plausible deniability or going a different direction are tried and experienced. It won't do for human beings. Don't tend to change just because they had an idea that something is wrong. They have to experience it as wrong and see it to the point of complete exhaustion. Well, no single individual could do that. And so you need a community. Even if that entire effort only gets going because of a single individual's creative breakthrough, you need the entire community to totally saturate the theory. And it also just goes to show you that Hegel's right when he tells you that the fear of error is also the fear of truth, because you need this error. You need all of these people exploring things and trying to take stuff down to reach that paradigm shift. Well, the same just applies to free exchange. If people are not able to speak or to voice all ideas, even the bad ideas, then we don't know what ideas are bad ideas. We can't totally saturate ideologies to the point where they break, because they are totally saturated, and thus there's a quote-unquote paradigm shift ideologically or intellectually. What the scientific community is, described by Kuhn and Samuel Loncar, is equivalent to what free exchange is for ideas, following Rauch and Milton. And yes, you need the mentidivergent individual, the creative individual, to introduce to the community and the collective these kind of radical, crazy ideas, or novel ideas, or new ideas, that then the community has to test in order so you don't fall into Nash equilibria situations. But you still have to have the community, and here you can see how you have the individual, but you also have the other. It's like the dance in Dante. You need the individuals for the dance, but the dance is not reducible to the individual, so you need the whole. And this is how knowledge advances. This is how humans gain knowledge. And ultimately, without free exchange, without these kind of processes, you cannot have rhetoric prevail over discourse. Discourse always wins over rhetoric, this creative human dialogue or discussion necessary for the fullness of the human subject. Rhetoric always suffers where free speech or process is limited. But we always limit process for good reason, because, it seems like we don't need it, and it seems like it's wasting time, and it seems like all process does is explore bad ideas or entertain ideas that are ultimately overthrown. But we, in that judgment, fail to realize the necessity of error in exploring mistakes and testing mistakes to get to the point of total saturation, where plausible deniability is run out and a paradigm can be shifted. And again, if we remove these processes, it's discourse which will benefit, which tends to contribute to our capture and our disablement and so on and so forth, versus rhetoric, which contributes to our enablement. But by what I mean by that will have to be expanded upon in Belonging Again too. For more by OG Rose, please visit ogrose.com, Twitter, Anchor, Instagram, so on and so forth. And thank you so much for your time.